This is George Whitten. It is January 30th, 2025. The title of this episode is Reagan, Trump, and the Middle East Conundrum. This worthy wrap, I'm really going to detail some things that are taking place. I want to start making a little bit of a few connections between Reagan and Trump and how it could actually help us understand what could be happening in the future and how to prepare praying into the events. The day after Sukkot ended, Israel launched an operation called Days of Repentance that destroyed the basically destroyed a nuclear facility that housed the missile components that they need to in order to fire a missile. And then they also took out all of the radar installations in Syria, Iraq, and Iran. So now they can hit the installation at any time. But the thing I really want to focus in on this is the day that it happened. The operation was called Days of Repentance. And the operation conducted in multiple ways on Friday night into early Saturday morning. And it comes from the word, repentance comes from the Hebrew word teshuvah, it means to return. And if you see this, it encapsulates the idea of spiritual renewal and self-improvement. And in Jewish tradition, this is known as the opportunity when the gates of heaven are open. So that is the day that it happened. Now, what's interesting is that particular day was the 23rd of Tishri. 23rd of Tishri. Tishri is the seventh month. Now, here's what happens on the 23rd day of the seventh month in 2 Chronicles 7. A passage that we read all the time for revival, for renewal. In verse 13, when I shut up heaven and there's no rain, or command the locusts to devour land, or send pestilence among my people, if my people who are called by my name will humble themselves and pray and seek my face and turn from their wicked ways, then I will hear from heaven and I will forgive their sin and heal their land. The days of repentance took place on the same day, 2,800 years ago or so, when Solomon was instructed about a repentance and about healing of the land. Now, what's interesting is when Reagan was inaugurated, in both his 1981 and his 1985 inaugural oaths, he had his Bible opened up to 2 Chronicles 7:14. I'm going to go through and show you how many interesting parallels there are between Reagan and Trump right now. Both Trump and Reagan survived an assassination attempt. You had a situation where the day that Reagan comes in office ends the Iran hostage crisis, where embassy employees and officials were held hostage for 444 days. The day that Trump comes in, their hostages being released. Now, people ask me all the time, do I think this is a good thing? Well, you have to understand, before Gilad Shalit, Israel never negotiated with terrorists. And I want to show you something. 82% of those that were released in the Shalit deal returned to terror activity. But here's a bigger thing that most people never read the fine print. Gilad Shalit was released after 5 years of Hamas captivity in 2011 in exchange for more than 1,000 Palestinian prisoners, including Sinwar, the architect of the October 7th attacks. So here we are, we're releasing hundreds of terrorists. Who knows if we're releasing another Sinwar? So if you ask me if this is a good thing, I think you're playing with the devil with this kind of situation. So that's just history, and history tends to repeat itself. Now, what's interesting is when Reagan came into office, there was a Lebanon agreement. There was an agreement with Lebanon, and it was signed between Lebanon and Israel during the Lebanese Civil War after Israel invaded Lebanon to end border attacks. Well, guess what? Israel's now in Lebanon. And right now, it'll be probably a situation where Trump will help negotiate an agreement. And in connection with that, you have to remember that one of the most horrific stories of 1983 was the Beirut barracks bombing, of American Marines, and actually as a multinational force. Now, both presidents nominated conservative women to the bench. They actually were the first conservative, and this is debatable how conservative she actually was, but when she was nominated, she was considered the first conservative, Sandra Day O'Connor. The second conservative woman appointed to the bench, Amy Coney Barrett, was appointed by Trump. Now you have a situation where Trump has blocked federal funding for abortions in U.S. and Mexico. Well, he's actually it was under Ronald Reagan that the Mexico City policy took place, and it was the first time that the United States would no longer contribute to separate non-governmental organizations to perform or actively promote abortion as a method of family planning in other nations. The other thing that's interesting was it was in 1984 that Ronald Reagan signed an act basically allowing classified information to be revealed. This is the beginning of this. And what's interesting, as soon as Trump comes in office, he releases classified files on JFK, RFK, and LFK. So we're going to see the files being released early February, sorry, and then we're going to see the second set of files roughly 45 days, so early March. Both what's interesting is that Reagan, he was the Star Wars initiative, and this is the thing. Well, now Trump is basically calling for an Iron Dome for America. I mean, there's so many parallels, it's almost mind-boggling. Now, we're coming up to a very significant feast day, Purim. Now, Purim, I think, is going to be very significant this particular year. It was in Purim of 1991, that was February 28th, that the Operation Desert Storm ended. It ended on Purim in 1991. And notice this, in Purim of 2003, it was literally almost to the day where the second Gulf War started on the Feast of Purim. So you have two different events connected to Purim. And then you had a very interesting situation in 2011. There was a supermoon over the Lincoln Memorial on March 19th. It was 2011, March 19th, that the Jewish people were celebrating Purim. It was also the same day that we began a war to take out Omar Gaddafi in Libya. So here it is. We have three different current wars connected to Purim. Now, another thing that's going to be very interesting this particular year is that history tends to repeat itself. It was in 1981. It was on Shavuot, and notice here it was June 7th, 1981. Well, what happened June 7th was Operation Babylon. Well, Operation Babylon is when the Israeli Air Force destroyed an unfinished Iraqi nuclear reactor in Iraq in 1981. At the beginning of in the beginning of Reagan's presidency, Israel takes out the reactor in Iraq. It very well could be that Israel takes out the reactor in Iran. We got to be very careful, or pay close attention this particular year. Over the next year or so, we have three significant blood red moons, and the blood red moons actually begins on March 14th, 2025, on the Feast of Purim. So Purim is the celebration of Esther and Mordecai's deliverance over Haman in the ancient kingdom of Persia in the modern state of Iran today. And that's the beginning of the first eclipse. And then we have another blood red moon on Rosh Hashanah, or Yom Teruah, the Feast of Trumpets. And then we have another eclipse coming the following Feast of Purim in 2026. So we have several different things coming up. When Reagan came into office, when he was concluding his second term, he basically had in America's Economic Bill of Rights. And so the American Bill of Rights was no taxation without representation, was the fundamental precept. And now Donald Trump is talking about rewriting the tax code. It was the same sort of scenario that played out, and things are playing itself out. Now, because we know what has already happened in Reagan's tenure, we can maybe see potential situations coming in the future. So one was there was a Challenger disaster. It was a horrific event. So, maybe there's a space disaster during Trump's term. You had Reagan negotiate with Gorbachev. And so now it could be that Trump is negotiating with Putin to end the Ukraine war. You had a scandal involving Iran. Now, I'm going to go in a little speculation. I'm not, this is just me speculating. This is not worthy news. This is just thought process. A few years ago when Barack Obama released billions of dollars to Iran, I thought to myself, why would you release billions of dollars? And those funds were used to fund terrorists in Lebanon and in Gaza and throughout the Middle East. The war that we're fighting today is because of those released funds. But I've always wondered, why did Barack Obama release those funds? And and I'm wondering, was there a scandal that we don't know about that comes out? Was there a scandal? Was he being blackmailed in some sort of way? I don't want to get into speculation, but these are the things that kind of I think about. The other thing that happened at the beginning of Trump's presidency or Reagan's presidency was that Anwar el-Sadat was assassinated. And now Anwar Sadat was the one that negotiated the peace between Egypt and Israel in 1978 in the Camp David Accords. Well, it's very interesting to see if we have another situation. Um, if in the near future we start seeing reports of the Nile River drying up or the water flow in the Nile becoming very, very low, I'm going to do another episode and really expound on this and what I see in prophecy, things that most people have not noticed. Another thing that was interesting was when when Reagan was in office, he had Social Security reform, he had tax reform, he actually had a tariff and trade agreement with Canada established. Those are all things that seem to be happening under Trump. And what was another thing that was interesting was when Reagan spoke to evangelicals in 1983, he warned against ignoring the facts of history and the aggressive impulses of an evil empire. So we should, maybe see the same sort of thing. When Reagan said these things, he wasn't being, political. He wasn't being, like a statesman that the world was used to seeing. And now we're seeing that same sort of situation with Trump. It was under Reagan that they had the invasion of Grenada. And what was interesting is that following Reagan's presidency was Bush's presidency, where they invaded Panama to take out Noriega. Well, these are things that, could they be playing themselves out? Nicaragua is a very tense situation. What played out way, way back in the 1980s is playing out today. The communist regime in Nicaragua is trying to stop a huge revival right now in Nicaragua. We just posted up another story today. I think that this is going to play itself out a little bit more. And it was under Reagan that we had the AIDS epidemic. So will we have another epidemic or another type of situation? And then some other things, the Chernobyl plant disaster, there was a stock market crash. So because we already see so many different parallels between Reagan and Trump, those are things that we will see if that actually kind of plays itself out. That's really it for this particular episode. If you don't get a Word of the Brief, sign up for it. If you don't have our app, the app is just a great way of following the news and keeping up to date with everything. The main thing is understanding that God has allowed Trump to come in office for what purpose? People often ask me, who did I vote for? Well, it really wasn't a no-brainer, but I voted for Donald Trump not because of Donald Trump. I actually voted with the thought process of which president would allow me to get the message of the gospel out the easiest. And to me, everything is about the gospel. Everything is about revival. Everything that's taken place is all about revival. And I believe that we're in these days of harvest and that God is actually using Donald Trump to free us as believers to go ahead and proclaim the gospel. That's, in essence, what I anticipated when I voted for Donald Trump. It had nothing to do with, different policies. I thought to myself, which president would go ahead and shut down Worthy News and shut down what we do on the internet the fastest? Does that mean that I'm a Trump supporter? No, not really. I just looked at which president could I go ahead and preach this gospel easiest through, and which one would allow me to continue preaching. Because when it's all said and done, Daniel 12 says this, that they that turn many to righteousness will shine like the brightness of the stars. So really, our focus should be about revival, should be about the winning of souls. Everything should be about the harvest. And so while we go ahead and look at news and look at different events, we look at what is God doing right now. And what I anticipate is God is doing something awesome, that these next few years will go ahead and be a bumpy ride. It's not going to be, a cakewalk. But at the same time, I believe that we as the body will become unshackled and will actually see a move. Now, that doesn't mean that there's the true church is not growing with the apostate church, that there is an apostasy that is growing that we see throughout many things. So be a tester. The first thing that the Lord said about these last days was, do not be deceived, meaning that deception should be everywhere. You shouldn't trust anything. You should test everything with the word and understand that God is coming back really, really soon. And he's saying to us, not only are we ready to see the Lord, but are we actively working toward what he's called us to do? And that's reaching people with the gospel. So until next time, hopefully I'll start becoming more regular with these worthy raps. There's a lot going on, and sometimes it's very difficult when we're on the road. But um, until next time, my name is George Whitten. It is January 30th, 2025. I hope to see you. Be blessed. Till next time.